Hey, Jack, good to connect. Having to do a lot of press today?
Just one interview before you, and that was a little while ago. So just got wrapped up in paying a few bills and that sort of thing, sitting in front of my computer. But I'm back in the interview world.
Sounds good. Am I getting you from London or from Canterbury?
Yeah, in Canterbury. Yeah.
Got it. And how are you holding up out there?
Yeah, it's pretty quiet here. I mean, nobody's around and stuff. But it seems a lot less sort of manic than it is in London, apparently. I haven't been to London for a few weeks now, but my kids live in London, and yeah, they say it's very spooky there.
Well, luckily, the current pandemic didn't prevent your solo album from coming out. And
Yeah.
it is a masterwork of sorts. You could tell a lot of effort goes into it in a day and age when people are putting out EPs. You've got 16 tracks on there and it's well over an hour. How long did you spend making Primitive?
Well, I guess it was a real concentrated burst of activity for about 2.5 months, from sort of January to mid-March in 2018. And then I sort of left it for a while. Then I went back to it again for another 2 or 3 months at the beginning of 2019, and then worked on it, sort of like putting live drums and that sort of stuff, getting other musicians to play on it to give a bit of variety. So, yeah, I guess sort of 2 years, but there were some sort of fairly long breaks where I just sort of let it settle for a while and try to get my head around what I was actually doing.
Well, you also did that cover of the Beck song with members of Syd Arthur, and that's
Yeah.
not on this album. So are you always recording things even when there isn't an album going on?
I love to record, and I'm very fortunate to be in a town where there's a lot of musicians going on, even if there's sometimes it feels like there's really nowhere for them to play. But yeah, there's lots of music going on here, and some great musicians. So wonderful.
Are the Syd Arthur guys locals?
Yeah, they are essentially. They have certainly went to school here in Canterbury. I think nowadays they live further out. There's a bunch of little seaside towns along the coast, about 5 miles north of where I live. And they sort of moved out to the beach communities. So it's kind of like some version of California out here. But
Is that Margate? Is that one of them?
Yeah, Margate's one of them. There's a town called Deal, another town called Whitstable as well.
Got it. Learning my geography right now. So
Yeah,
bringing
yeah.
it back to you here, you've got this very interesting existence where there's kind of three Jacks as far as I know. There's the guy who did the solo album. There's the guy who does Wang Chung. And then there's
Uh-huh.
the guy who composes for film and the occasional television project and all that. Do you find that most people are aware that you do all these different things rather than saying that's the guy from Wang Chung?
Yeah, I guess most people say, "Oh, yeah, that's the guy from Wang Chung." But I think even within Wang Chung, there's probably people who know Everybody Have Fun Tonight and perhaps don't know that we wrote To Live and Die in LA, that we also did Space Junk, which was a tune used in The Walking Dead. And so, with Wang Chung, there's quite a lot of variety even within that sort of umbrella.
When you have these Wang Chung gigs coming up, because I know you have a lot of festival gigs scheduled around the UK at the moment, hopefully they're all going ahead as planned. Do you work in any of your solo stuff, or is it really just give the people the 80s hits and that's that?
I mean, with the festivals, it tends to be you sort of do 3 or 4 songs, and those 3 or 4 songs are usually the hits. That's just the nature of the beast. So, but I would love to do some gigs in the future. In fact, I was planning a launch gig for this album, which would have been playing about sort of 8 of the tunes from PRIMITIV, but also playing a couple of Wang Chung songs as well. Mixing it up that way, I think, would be really cool, and slightly reinterpreting the Wang Chung songs would be fun.
When you just named a bunch of the Wang Chung hits, you didn't say Dance Hall Days, and that is a song that just keeps getting licensed over and over and over again. Between that and Everybody Have Fun Tonight, how much of that is people pitching versus people like just coming to you and licensing it organically?
It's a mixture. I've been very fortunate over the years to have great projects just like come out of the blue. To Live and Die in LA probably being the greatest of them. But we also have a publishing company that's pretty, what should we say, aggressive is probably the wrong word, but they certainly get the music out there. And I guess we're very fortunate to have these songs that sort of represent an era in a way that movie people kind of like.
So this might require a little bit of thought, but when was it that you kind of realized that you were going to be okay, that even if you didn't have a new hit on the charts, that your past catalog was actually going to sustain you for decades, if not the rest of your life.
Well, I see that now, and I'm old now. So when I was like in the 90s and the noughties, I was constantly surprised that the royalties, as it were, kept coming in. I think you always have this sense as a musician of being focused on whatever it is that you're doing at the current moment. In my case, quite often that's something that's not generating money. In some cases, costing me money. But thank God those royalties did roll in over the years. And some men, I think at my age, they sort of have sports cars or sort of like expensive holidays or something. But I have a sort of jazz band and I make solo albums. So that's what I do.
You do come from a classical background. I remember reading that you studied at the Royal College and all that. Did you know outright that you were going to be going into the pop world? Was it a plan B from jazz and the classical arts?
Not really, actually. The way around it was, I started playing guitar when I was 8 years old because I heard the Beatles on the radio, probably saw them on television by that time, and I was just obsessed with them, And I wanted to get a guitar and just wanted to be like them, So my dad, who was a musician, a jazz musician actually, said, okay, we'll get you a guitar, but you've got to have proper lessons. So I had these guitar lessons where I was taught to read music and play guitar, but not in a sort of strictly classical way. And it wasn't really until I was like 18 when I went to university where I thought, well, I want to do music at university, because I'm just that's what I want to do. And in those days, you couldn't do like a rock course or a jazz course like you can now. It was just straight classical music. And really at that time, I knew nothing about classical music. So my years at university were my education in classical music. And up to that point, I was listening to rock music. I was listening to the Beatles, and then I got into Cream, Hendrix, and then a lot of prog stuff, Genesis, yes, and I guess a bit of Frank Zappa, and all the stuff that was, right across the spectrum there,
And somebody going through your discography will notice that you never really chased any trends. You went prog at a time when people were getting more simple.
Yeah.
Were you secretly a metal fan at any point?
Metal, no, probably not. Other than, well, it depends what you define. When we talk about genres, I always get a little sort of itchy because I think they really accurately sort of map the music. So when you say metals, maybe like Led Zeppelin. I think of Led Zeppelin as a prog band, really not a metal band. But I was really into them. I guess the closest I got to what might be called metal would be Deep Purple.
Right. I see what you mean in that they have songs that are 12 minutes live. Dazed and Confused goes on 25 minutes, or Moby Dick goes on for 25 minutes or something like that.
Sort of double neck guitars and all that stuff. That's all very prog to me. And, just because Bonham's a sort of heavy sounding drummer, really he's a very funky drummer as well. He plays a lot on the sort of shuffle sense of the beat, and I think that's what gives them the magic, makes them a truly amazing band.
Agreed. And a lot of those artists were actually big jazz heads over the years that when they weren't doing their big arena projects, they were kind of doing jazz and classically leaning things on the side. So that's a very good point you got. So bring it back to you, though. What is coming up in general? How far are you booked out, keeping in mind that, of course, everyone's just waiting to see what's happening?
Yeah, well, all the we were going to do some Wang Chung stuff in the summer. That's all on hold, I guess on hold, isn't it? Because hopefully it will all get rearranged for a little later in the year. And also, in a way, the delay around with when PRIMITIV has come out, I always imagined that it would take a little bit of time for people to listen to the record and for it to gain some sort of traction. And at that point, I could then approach promoters with the possibility of doing some gigs to sort of actually air the tunes in a live setting. And I would certainly love to do that. So in a way, having this little sort of maybe 3-month thing, where people are more at home and more listening to music, hopefully, that may prove to be like a good opportunity to, as I say, let the album gain a bit of traction.
Is there any movie scoring that's on the horizon? And of course, right now, film and TV projects are kind of shut down. But I'm not sure if you had something in the works from a couple of months ago that you were still working on.
Not really. My sort of movie scoring was really 80s, 90s sort of stuff, and I never really kind of delved deep into the movie score thing. Our songs have been used in movies many times, but the movie scores that I did were for Billy Friedkin, To Live and Die in LA, and I did his movie The Guardian as well, and but I haven't really I did a bit of TV stuff, but I've not really done movies aside from that. It's something that I'm still interested in doing, but I think when I worked with Billy, especially with To Live and Die in LA, his approach was to let me just write the music. I wrote the music without seeing the film, and that was a very kind of unique experience. And then he edited the film to the music, in not all of it, but in some cases, and that gives the film some of that kind of tautness that I think people really appreciate these days. At the time, the film was not a commercial success, but it was, I think, highly regarded by people in the industry, But over the years, it's become a real classic, And I think one of the things that people see about it is the way that the intertwining of the music and the movie is very, very close. And so opportunities to work like that, if they came up, I'd love it. If it means sitting in a room scoring to picture, I think I'd probably give that a miss.
That makes sense. So as somebody who's written songs that are still played regularly around the world decades later, is there anything that you're still hoping to accomplish within your career that you haven't yet?
I don't really look at it in that way. I just sort of pretty focused on like the next thing I'm doing. I'm very proud of PRIMITIV. I think it sort of represents me as I am now. It's a kind of in-depth sort of record. The songwriting on it, I think, shows a lot of range, and I think for songwriters, if they have a listen to it, there's a lot to sort of take on, really, in terms of what I'm doing with the structures and stuff. So PRIMITIV is great. I'd like to do more of my jazz stuff. I guess maybe there's a sort of sense of trying to pull everything together. I think I have this sense that, the songwriting, the more improvisatory jazz stuff, that somehow there's some hybrid out there that I will get to where it all sounds sort of integrated, But I guess there's also, I have this sort of in the back of my mind. I did a couple of years ago, I started looking at writing an opera. That's something I kind of would like to have a look at some point. But even as I say it, it's such a huge thing to take on, But yeah, doing something like that would be an interesting thing to do.
Wow. Opera, classical, jazz, prog, pop. You kind of been all over the place in the best of ways, Jack.
Yeah. I see it all as one thing, really. One of my favorite stories, I don't know if we have time for it, but it's a great book by Alex Ross called The Rest is Noise. I'm looking at it right on my shelf here. And he opens up that book with this great story about George Gershwin, who was obviously a very successful songwriter in the 1920s and 30s, deciding that he needed to go to Europe to get some lessons from the sort of great classical composers who were still writing there. So he went to France, he went to Paris to see Maurice Ravel, and Ravel basically said to him, I can't teach you anything. In fact, you should teach me how to make money out of music. And he then went on to Vienna and met a composer who I really admire called Alban Berg. Berg was a Viennese composer writing in a pretty tough sort of what would have been considered then a sort of avant-garde type style. Anyway, so Gershwin goes to Berg's house, and Berg honours him, as it were, with a performance of a piece that he just written called the Lyric Suite, which is for a string quartet. So Berg had arranged a performance in his house, and so Gershwin goes along. You can imagine him sitting in this beautiful Viennese property, drapes and velvet curtains. I don't know what it was like, but I sort of get the picture of it, and listening to this incredible music. And at the end of it, Gershwin's just totally blown away by it. And Berg says to him, so Mr. Gershwin, it would be great to hear some of your music. And Gershwin says, you've got to be kidding. I can't play you some of my songs after listening to that. And Berg says to him, but Mr. Gershwin, music is music. And that for me sums it up. It doesn't really matter what you're doing, what the kind of umbrella is, what the label that's pinned on it. It's the integrity of what you're doing. And if it has integrity and authenticity, then it's probably worth listening to, whatever genre it's in.
Except metal.
Except metal, yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I'm a big metal guy, but if you can appreciate everything, that's the best way to take it all. So in closing, Jack, any last words for the kids?
Well, if you're sort of shut down at the moment, then pick up an instrument and learn it. Music, I think, is a great enhancement of life. And the older you get, the better the enhancement gets. So do something with music as soon as you can.